you are, Heather. Wow. Oh, everybody. Heather. Thank you so much for being here, Heather. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine. Oh, let me just move my microphone a bit closer though.
Yeah.
I move it away and then I forget to bring it back in. There we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thank you. Can you hear Heather all right, everybody? Yeah. Great. So, Heather, we have a room full of people here. Unfortunately, the way that we've set up this configuration, you can't actually see them, but they are here and they were very nice and loud when you appeared. So Lockie's just doing a final little few things. Oh, sure. Okay. Sorry, we're just having one little technical difficulty, Heather.
Wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without it.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Can la 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 la.
Oh, beautiful singing.
Thank you.
So how was dinner?
People are eating some great food, actually. It smells pretty good.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me all right with this microphone?
I can, absolutely.
Oh, beautiful. It's not doing feedback for you or anything like that?
No, which sort of surprises me a little, so well done to your tech guy.
Thank you. Look, this is our second... Yeah, well done, Lockie. A round of applause for Lockie. Woo!
Yes.
Thank you. This is our second book club meeting, Heather. Last month we were able to meet with Hannah Kent, who wrote Devotion.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was really lovely. We are very new with this tech stuff, so thank you for your patience. Hey, and is that...
You've nailed it. What are you talking about?
Thank you very much. If it looks like I'm not really looking at you, it's because you're on a lovely big screen here so that everybody can see you. And for the live stream, because this is going out to lots of our book club members who can't be here tonight, there's over 100.
Oh, wow. Hello,
members in South Australia. Yeah, so we've got members from all over Australia, so that's great. So this will be going out as a live stream to them as well. Okay, very good. All right. So firstly, just before we start...
If you have to talk into that microphone, you might want to clip it on.
It's very clever, thank you.
You're waving it around like a flag in a breeze.
I know, yeah. That's all right? Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right if it sits just there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, good, great. Very good. Right. Okay, so just before we start our chat, Heather, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with respect that I acknowledge the Menang people, their elders past, present and emerging. It is a privilege to be here, to live here, to learn and to read. It's wonderful to be here, so thank you. Okay, thank you for coming this evening, everybody. So, Heather Morris, thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure.
Yes, and all the way over from Melbourne. You're in Melbourne at the moment? No,
Brisbane. I relocated. I kicked Victoria to the curb and moved up to Brisbane.
Okay. Oh, when did that happen?
In December.
Oh, wow. So you're newly over in Brisbane. That's great. So the weather's better?
Heck yes.
Great. So Heather, you grew up in a small rural town that part of the North Island of New Zealand. Now, forgive me if I mispronounce this. Te Anwatutu?
Oh, not even close, girl. Te Awamutu.
Okay. Right, little rural area. Gosh, was it just ridiculously scenic like everything in New Zealand?
Probably, but when you live there and you're a kid, it feels like a prison.
Yeah, oh yeah, okay, yeah, being small and rural. So, and you are the second child out of 5, is that right? Yes, and you're the only girl out of 5.
Yes. So I had known nothing about sisters. They're writing a book called 3 Sisters. And
yeah, that's right.
It's wonderful to me how to relate to them.
What was it like for little Heather? Tell us a little bit about young Heather.
Well, naturally enough, I was a tomboy.
Yeah.
It was, well, not jeans. We didn't have jeans back there, but it was gumboots and sloppy jumpers. And for me, I spent more time hanging out in the paddocks, trying to persuade the cows and the dogs to listen to my stories than I did with my family. I think, I've said it before, but I grew up in that generation where kids were to be seen and not heard. We were told nothing about what went on. And so I used to try and make up stories based on just little bits I would hear. And I was also prone for whenever somebody did come to our house, it would be a neighbour or maybe a family of auntie or an uncle came around, of being sent out of the house, only then to sneak back in and push open a window or do whatever I could to try and, my mother called it earwigging, eavesdropping, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I would then, whatever little snippet I'd heard, I'd try and create a story around it, and I'd try and spin it to my family as being true. Of course, I wasn't fooling anybody. But I grew up with my family all referring to me as, there's Heather, the bullshit artist. I thought I was a storyteller, and I prefer to call myself, but no.
So what brought you to Australia?
Well, I fled as soon as I could, leave school, work for the necessary 2 years in the town to be able to get enough money to be able to leave.
Yeah.
And yes, came to Melbourne as a sort of 18-year-old.
How long were you in Melbourne for?
Look, I was here, gosh, it was for about 5 years, but during that time I met my husband and we got married, and he was unsettled. He's a Vietnam veteran, and back in the early 70s, it was a tough time for him, having recently returned. And so he persuaded me to go back to New Zealand. I agreed, but on the condition that we did not go anywhere near where my family was in the North Island. So we went to Christchurch on the South Island, and we lived there for about 14, 15 years. And that's where our 3 children were born. And he got headhunted back to Australia. So we came back because he got headhunted here for work.
Did your children follow you to Australia then?
Oh, they were just kids. They had no choice.
Yes, they were still young. Yeah.
They were little tackers,
Yeah. Did you always want to be a writer?
No, not at all. Yeah. I was quite happy being a bullshit artist.
Yes, yeah.
And always telling stories. I knew I liked to tell stories, but I liked to I would tell a story based on something I'd seen or heard.
Yes.
I do not have a creative bone in my body. I could not write a book purely out of my own imagination. Yeah. But give me a spark and I'll then go off on it, which is what not only the stories that have been published are about, but I think you probably read somewhere that I learned, when I decided to learn how to write things, I thought, I have no idea how to write. I can't be a writer. I'm going to learn how to write screenplays because I love movies.
Yeah.
But by doing that, and I've got a drawer full of all these sort of scripts that I wrote for several years. I just like telling stories, but all of them are based on something that I either read in the newspapers or in a magazine or I saw or heard myself.
So you had a natural lean towards historical fiction. Yeah.
So not always, a lot of it were current, but I would, once again, they're always based on it. I have this incredible story, which one day might get told. It's about the 1956 Olympic Games in Australia. And I met the man who was the head of security way back then. It's just a intelligence officer. I spent a year badgering him every weekend, tell me, until he finally gave in and told me.
So that's a skill in itself, though, isn't it? You seem to, do you find that stories come to you, people and the stories come to you?
They do now.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Looking initially.
Yes, yep. So, because I read that you originally studied political science before you moved into screenwriting. So, how did you make your way from studying political theory to then writing historical novels?
Well, they're both spinning bullshit yarns, aren't they? Let's face it. We're amongst friends here, aren't we? Gosh, I hope so. No, that's not quite right, because when I majored in political science and sociology, and then I went and worked in a hospital in social work for 20 years, which had nothing to do with screenwriting. That was something that happened later when my kids stopped asking me to drive them somewhere. I have the car keys, Mum. That I then decided, well, during my spare time, I would just see what this writing a screenplay was all about. And here's the thing, guys, if anyone's who's interested in wanting to tell a story and structure a story, learning the rules of screenwriting was just the best thing out for me, because screenplays, whatever you want to call them, they come with a formula and they come with rules, and you don't deviate from those rules unless you're Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
So, you know, 3 acts, get this in the first 10 pages and learn those rules. But what it taught me was how to structure a story from beginning, middle, and end, and in the tight constraints of 120 pages, which is a 2-hour film.
So we were just discussing that beforehand, actually, before you joined us, that this book really pulled you in from the very beginning and had great momentum, great pace. And we wondered if that was something that you were able to bring to your writing from your screenwriting experience, because it did. It almost played like a film in my head when I was reading it.
Yeah, because like that's the only way I've ever learned anything. I still to this day haven't had anybody teach me how to write a book.
Yeah.
So I'm still going down that path. But here's the best thing I think about writing screenplays, and really hard to do when you're writing about Holocaust stories, is the importance of what they say in screenwriting, of changing the emotional arc of your story. Even a comedy will not have everybody laughing for the 2 hours. You cannot do that. A heavy drama can't have everybody crying the whole time. You must constantly change the emotional arc of your story. So trying to find ways to change the horrors of Auschwitz is not easy. But you find a different emotion, be it friendship, be it love, be it whatever, to be able to balance it out. And so once again, lesson well learned. Which
is really interesting, because that, reading this book that had such harrowing content and, could really just weigh so heavy as a reader, having these moments of levity in amongst this kind of context, where the sisters are bantering and kind of having that sibling harassment of each other, or making light of something. Like the grandfather had alluded to them. He'd said, humour will save you. Laugh, and if you can't laugh, smile. And we really see that the sisters were doing that and trying to digest what was happening to them through this kind of, these little moments of humour, which as a reader was amazing, because it would bring me back down to connecting with these women, like would ground me to the fact that these are just, average young women with all of that spectrum of emotion and experience before this. I don't know, that was...
Oh, it worked.
To be a really interesting device.
Oh, I'm glad it worked. Yes, because it's true. And they weren't even in some ways young women. Livy was just a girl.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that beautiful scene, actually, towards the end of the book. Oh, and I might just say now, for people who are streaming in, if you haven't read the book, there may be a few spoilers.
Yes, we spoil it.
Yes, I'm sorry. I can't help that with the spoilers, because Heather's here and I want to talk to her about all of it, so sorry. You just have to deal with that. But yeah, that beautiful, beautiful scene where Magda gets a job as a housekeeper for the President of Israel. Yeah, how wonderful is that? And she, is explaining to Sibby that the wife of the President wanted to know, inquiring, do all of your sisters have numbers? And she said to Sibby, well, I told her that, no, you guys don't have numbers, because the Nazis only gave numbers to the special ones. And that was just so beautiful, that moment. Is that something that occurred, that they retold to you? Did they have lots of... Yeah, lots
which is really interesting that it was Magda that said that, because Magda, she was not in Birkenau with them for 2.5 years.
Yeah, yes.
She was only there for a few months.
Yeah.
And she said it still weighs heavily on her that for 2.5 years she slept in her own bed with her mother and grandfather while the others were in that evil place. I was in Israel I came back about 3 weeks ago. And once again, sitting with dear darling Magda, who every time I look at her, I burst into tears. I can't be with her without just absolutely sobbing.
Yeah.
And she's just an angel, and she still struggles with the guilt of having, as she said, slept in my own bed. And I finally asked her this time when I was in Israel, and I said, look, can I ask you something? And Livy was there, and her daughters were there. I said, do you think you're struggling to deal with how your guilt. She's now 98. It's because you did go there. You did get to see the evil place that they had survived in. And would it have been different if you hadn't and you simply found each other after the war? And she thought about that for quite a while. She initially said, I don't know. And then she said, no, of course it was, because Livy and Sibby would never have told me how horrible that place was. And I would never.
That's right. They would have protected her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting point, because that the topic of guilt and survivor's guilt is explored quite a bit in this book. And it's, with each of the women when they're finally meeting their husbands, the men who will become their husbands, there's lots of points there. Like, I think it's actually Livy's husband, Ziggy, who is, he's really quite distraught, isn't he? That he really felt like he had an easy ride through that time comparatively. And he really wrestled with that for a really, really long time. I don't know.
Well, the whole time that up until his death, it really was something with those three men. I kind of feel sorry for them, because they married these three very strong, dominant women. Yeah. And the families, won't always tell me, and once again, having just been with them, I love to say how tough it was on the fathers, but they took it in their stride. Yes, none of them had endured the way that their wives had, but with there is an exception though for the other two, not Ziggy, but Magda and Sibby's husband, and the exception for them was not known to the kids. The kids, by the way, are those 6 children that those girls had. I call them the kids. They're my age and older, but that's how I can distinguish them from the girls, which are.
Yes, yeah.
But they did not know a certain secret that both of their fathers had.
Yeah.
Which was, and it was Maggie and Magda and Livy deciding to tell me. And when they told me, I said, well, if you haven't told the rest of the family, I can't do anything with this. And so they decided they would tell him. And that is that Sibby's husband had watched while his wife and 4-year-old daughter Judith had been put on a train in Bratislava and sent to Auschwitz, never to return. Yeah. And that Magda's husband had seen his wife and his 2 sons taken, never to return. Yeah. They did not know that their fathers had prior families.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Gosh, it just goes so deep, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the book, towards the end, like the epilogue, that was so beautiful. And thank goodness for the epilogue. It just was wonderful to see the beautiful, rich lives that these women were able to have, and the generations that came after them, and how close they all were, and still in such wonderful contact. But you get the impression that the sisters shared their story with their children. Did the children grow up knowing that this?
No.
They always speak about it, or?
It was very different. Livy and Ziggy, they spoke to their son and daughter and told them quite a bit. They wanted them to know. Sibby hardly said anything to her 2 boys.
Yeah, okay.
And Magda said very little. Just little bits came out now and then. So the other 4 cousins knew very little. They were learning about their parents from the cousins from Livy's
right.
daughter.
But and of course, from this book,
they couldn't go and ask their mothers, and because they wouldn't talk to them. So know them that not all the 3 girls spoke to their families. It really was living.
Different ways of coping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the ways that they cope, and these are things, by the way, you're not going to read them in the book or anywhere else I speak. But it was wonderful, once again, being in Livy and in Magda's apartments and being in their rooms with these paintings on the wall. Because both Livy and Magda, when they first went to Israel after only a few years, they decided they needed to do something creatively to be able to, as an outlet for the emotions they were keeping inside. And they both decided to learn painting. They even got a teacher, and they started doing painting. Well, Livy's got over 100 works of art, sort of most of them piled in a spare bedroom, many on her wall. Magda also has got her walls and the family's walls are just adorned with the artwork of these 2 girls.
Yeah.
And what they both chose to paint, and they hadn't appreciated it. And I think this is where the family get quite grateful with me at times, is that I've come in as an outsider, and I've looked at their artwork and I've interpreted it differently or in such a way that the family hadn't considered.
Yes, yeah.
When I pointed out to them, you realise that Livy, everything you've painted, for the most part, is nature. It's trees, it's flowers, it's bushes, it's that kind. All her scenes are nature.
Yeah.
That was Livy. She wanted to be outside. She wanted to be in the forest.
Yes, yeah.
She hadn't appreciated that is where she found her kept her sane, her sanity. Whereas Magda, who was a total homebody, wanted to be inside with Mama. All her paintings are of buildings, primarily homes.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. So from around where they grew up.
Yeah. And Israel, wow. Where they were living.
And Israel, wow. Okay.
So,
wow. So that actually adds another interesting layer to the knowing that was it Livy's son had done this sculpture with his wife Pam.
Yes.
That adds another layer to that, actually, knowing that Livy and Magda were kind of artists themselves and had done so much expression through art to then be engaging with that images of the sculpture. Yeah, wow.
Many members of the family in Israel, 3 adult generations, work in the creative arts in one way or another. One's a dress designer, costume designer. One is a painter, artist. One does woodwork. It does actually creates beautiful furniture and stuff. Once again, all very artistic. And of course, Odie, who does the glass sculpturing.
Wow, gosh, it's beautiful. So, I do actually have some questions, but we'll just. So the journey of the tattooist trilogy began with a chance encounter, really, didn't it? And for those who don't know, especially the people who are watching from home, could you recount that? How did you meet the tattooera Lali? And how did this meeting then lead you to meet the Mella sisters and hear their remarkable story?
I love it. There's connections and connections and connections.
Yeah, yep.
And it's a lovely lesson. I try, and particularly when I'm talking to schools, to kids, about a little life lesson. It's a nice, simple one. That somebody asks you to do something or go somewhere or be somewhere, unless you've got a good reason for not being there, then say yes.
Yeah.
I said yes to catching up with a friend to have a cup of coffee I hadn't seen for several months. And while having that coffee, she just casually said to me, I have a friend whose mother has just died. His father has asked him to find somebody he can tell a story to. That person can't be Jewish. You're not Jewish. Do you want to meet him? It was as simple as that, folks. Yeah. When I asked what his story was and she said she didn't know, and I said, well, never mind. I'd love to meet him. So I said yes to coffee and yes to meeting Lali Sokolov because I had no good reason not to.
Yes.
So.
Especially when, no more was offered. She had no idea what the story was. She just knew very little of this man, but would you go and meet him? That's amazing. Well done for, and I'm sure lots of people would do that, but that's wonderful that you went and met with Lali.
Oh, absolutely. It changed my life, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And he was in mine for 3 years, up until literally 2 hours before he died. I was with him.
Right.
Knowing that he wasn't going to see the sun come up the next day. I knew that. I was told he wouldn't survive the night. And the last thing I said to him, gosh, it's so vivid to me, as I sort of kissed him goodbye, was that I would just never, ever stop trying to tell his story.
Yeah.
It took me a while, folks, because I stubbornly hung on to it in its screenplay format for several years. I did have it optioned at one point to be made into a film, but then in Melbourne, but that didn't happen, and I just kept hanging on to it. And I was visiting my sister-in-law and my brother in San Diego in California and complaining about those buggers 100 miles up the road in Hollywood who wouldn't know a decent story but hit them over the head.
Yeah.
I've been sending it to all these studios in the States and in Europe. And my sister-in-law just looked at me totally exasperated. Oh, for goodness sake, write the bloody thing as a book and get on with it. And she told me.
Yeah. What was that process like then, changing it from a screenplay into a novel?
I thought I was cleverer than I was. I came back to Australia and spoke to my son and sort of said that, this is what I'm going to do. Then I contacted said brother and sister-in-law in San Diego, and they have a holiday house in a part of California called Big Bear. It's a mountain sort of between LA and San Diego, but go inland to the border with Arizona. And so I said, I can have your house for a month. So I went to their house for a month in the middle of winter in January, they had winter. And for a month by myself, just me and 2 squirrels who hung outside my door each day. I adapted. I thought, oh, here's the script. You know, it's really well polished screenplay I've got. I'll just sort of sit here and I'll now just take it out of that format and write it. And I'd got publishers by that stage who had, because I'd gone around in a circuitous way to be able to get a publisher. Getting old, didn't have time to be mucking around with rejection letters, guys. I went through a different way. And they said I could have a go at it. They were going to give it to a ghostwriter. And they said, oh, okay, then let me have a go at it. So when I sent it to them feeling as proud as punch, hey, look what I did. The email came back saying, you don't know what you're doing, do you?
Yeah. So what happened then? Did they give
Well,
you some support? A good editor, yeah.
They tried to say to me, look, write it as a memoir. And I started, oh, okay then. So I went to memoir school for a day. It was a 5-day course, but I knew it wasn't going to work for me.
Yeah.
Pushed that one off and then, okay, write it in the third person. And I'm going, what's the third person? So in the end, they just said, listen, why don't you just go away and write the book you want to tell? And so that's what I have.
Yeah.
But I know when I sent it to them, Kate Parkin, who is the head of Bonnier in London, my God, she's one of the most senior publishers in all of the UK. She wrote to me and she said, been a long time since I've read a manuscript where the author can, in one sentence, be writing in the voice of the first person, the third person, back to the first. Oh, here's the second.
That's awesome.
Bloody good editors, that's the trick, guys.
Wow.
Yeah. And it turned out to be a quick learner, thankfully.
Yeah. So how did Lale's story bring you to meet the Mella sisters?
Aha.
2 of the Mella sisters.
I love it that I've got stories behind my stories. It gives me something else to talk about if everyone's read the book. I was in South Africa. I was there at a book festival there in a little place called Franschhoek, just out of Cape Town. It's the wine region, by the way, if anyone who's thinking of going there, and they have really good wines. And I got back to my room about 2:00 in the morning, which kind of tells you they were very good wines. My daughter in Melbourne had been sending me messages all day long saying, Mum, there's an email you need to read. Mum, have you read the email? Mum, if you don't read the email, I'm going to come over there and put it in front of you. So I knew that before I went to bed, I had to read an email that was sitting on my laptop. And I did. And there was no more sleeping. It was an email from Oded, which is Livy's son, saying that he had picked up a copy of The Tattooist at Toronto Airport on his way to visit his mother in Israel. And a couple of days later, he had left the book on her table. I am so grateful that the publishers in Canada, which are HarperCollins, the same publisher that is in the United States, did not take the cover that the US had, The Tattooist. The fact that they took the Australian cover, and of the 56 countries that have published that book now, only Canada and Brazil have the same cover as we do.
Yeah, okay.
If they hadn't, then I would never be telling the story. Because he left that book on a coffee table in his mum's home, and she walked past, glanced down at it, and said to him, and this is what he wrote to me in the email, my mother looked at the cover and said to me, that must be about Lale and Gita. And when I asked, how could you possibly know? And she said, simple, look at the number on the girl's arm. She said, now look at the number on my arm. They're 3 apart, aren't they?
Oh, I've just got goosebumps. Yeah.
Right. Libby's was 2 away from Gita's. We went to school with Gita. We were on the train going to Auschwitz with Gita. We were in block 21 with Gita. You have met Gita. She used to come to Israel and stay with your Aunt Magda.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
from
there, emails flowed for the next couple of days, and I think I might have been in Cape Town or somewhere, and I got a message to call. Livy wanted to talk to me. So I ring up this, she was, 93 then, she's 96 now. So I ring her up, and she's chatting for a few minutes, and she said, I really want to talk to you, but I don't like talking on the telephone. So can you come and see me? I remember something going, I'm in South Africa, I live in Melbourne, and you live in Israel, but yeah, sure, why not? So, a quick phone call to London when I mentioned, I sort of said, look, when I get back to Melbourne, I want to go. I need to go and speak to this lady. I told them about the emails that we'd be having. And the next day I got a message from London saying, yes, we're rerouting you from Johannesburg in 2 days' time to Tel Aviv. So you're going there straight away. There's no going home. I remember saying to Kate, oh, look, I can't go. Let me go home first, and then I'll make plans to go there. She said, well, why not? I can see your itinerary. You know, I know you're free. You're going to Tel Aviv. And I went, can we postpone it? She said, why? Give me a good reason why not. And I said, well, I have one really good reason, Kate, and it's because I've run out of clean knickers. I'm going home to do the washing.
Yeah.
She told me to go shopping or learn how to wash, she said. So I literally did. You know, less than 2 days later, I stepped off a plane in Tel Aviv, not knowing which way it was up. And,
in clean knickers, yes.
Yeah, I think I went shopping.
Yes. So what was it like meeting and speaking with people who knew Lale after you'd spent so much time with him?
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, they never met Lale, or other than once they left Auschwitz, they never met Lale, because Lale never left Australia. He was leaving Australia, didn't go.
Yeah.
He threw away the fraudulent passport that got him here. But Gita, when she threw away her fraudulent passport, she just went to the Australian authorities and said, I'm a displaced person, I've lost my passport, can I have one of yours, please? And they went, yeah, sure, here you go, love. So she did travel. She went in and out of Slovakia, which is why she was able to go and stay with Silka, which is why I know so much about Silka, because Gita and Silka were friends for decades. But she also, when she went to Israel, she often stayed with Magda, and Sibby and Livy would get together. And
God, it's beautiful.
Just wonderful.
Amazing connections.
Yeah.
You've got some other really interesting connections with people or survivors' family members, haven't you? Like, would you mind telling, there's a beautiful story about when you were doing a book signing and a lady came up to you and said, I'm here because of the Tatawera.
Yeah, there's so many times I kind of get knocked for a six by these incredible people who come to me, both survivors and children of survivors and grandchildren of survivors. Many of them are wanting my advice on how can I get my mother or my grandfather to talk. I want to hear their story, and they won't. It's quite heartbreaking when that happens.
Yeah.
This was a lady out of London who just handed me the book to sign, and those words, they just chilled me, because it's not something you say. It's not a complete sentence.
Yeah.
He just said, I am here because of Lale the Tatawera and a man whose name I do not know.
Yeah.
Wow, that's coming from somewhere.
That gives you shivers.
Yeah, get behind me. We need to talk, which is what I did, and spoke to her later. This is a classic example, folks, of what Lale told me he did all the time. I don't go on about it in his story because it sounds too fantastical. And hey, let's face it, I copped, a bit of crap and a bit of flack as it was for telling his story the way I told it. Nobody anymore is denying its authenticity as it relates to Lale. But when the book first came out, there were some. Excuse me, sir. But this woman then told me that, and this is what I say, Lale told me he said hundreds, whether it was half a dozen, dozens, I don't care. He did it, and here's my living proof.
Yeah.
Her father had been a 17-year-old young boy in one of the blocks in Birkenau. It was a block that was, everyone was going to the gas chamber the next day. Those men in that block had been there for 5 or 6 months. They're now so weak. They're no longer as productive as the others. And there are still thousands and thousands of people streaming in. So the Nazis were just simply blocks 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever. you're all going to the gas chamber the next day. It just happened like that. Excuse me, I've been hanging out with a 2-year-old all day who doesn't shut up. And so he's in this camp after work, knowing that he's going to his death the next day, when Lully comes in, and he randomly picked this young 17-year-old out, and he took him out of the block and round to the side of it. And there was a strange older man there. He said older. This girl's telling me my dad said he was older. He probably was sort of 25, 30.
Yeah.
Lully was there with him, and this older man had apparently come to Lully and said to him, I am sick. I have typhus. I am not going to survive. I am going to die. Make my death count. So what Lully did, which he did many times, he went and found in one of those blocks designated for everyone to die, he would pick a young, healthier looking young chap, and he changed the numbers of these 2 men. There was these tattooed, and so the older man, the 25-year-old, into the block and to his death the next day. And Lully then took the 17-year-old to the block that the man came from.
Yeah.
And he then was able to not only survive, but go to London and have a family.
Have a life and a family.
When they were growing up, and her and her brothers were fighting and getting upset about something, she said that really didn't matter, broken boyfriend relationships, whatever.
Yeah.
He would just say those words to us all our lives. Remember, you are only here because of Lully the Taravera and a strange man whose name I do not know.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah. So many beautiful, amazing stories. And it's just snippets like that I hear. But gosh, trust me, they touch me. I remember them forever.
Yeah. I have a question about historical fiction texts here. So in her article about why we read historical fiction, American author and editor of Narrative magazine, Linda Cass, she writes, reading history allows us to understand what happened, while reading historical fiction allows us to be moved by what happened. And just speaking of these sorts of encounters that you've had, what are your thoughts regarding this statement?
Oh, couldn't have said it better myself. Jealous.
Okay,
Yeah, the word that I hear from folks is that reading these stories makes the Holocaust relatable. That seems to be the word. That it's easier to relate to the one than it is to the 6 million.
Yes.
Perished. And here's another little brief story about the whole thing about 6 million. By the way, that was one of the criticisms that came my way when Lully's story came out. And not only was it, I think, other than something like Schindler's List, a historical fiction book, Holocaust fiction, but it talked about the one. And the academics, the historians, up until just recently, they had wanted the memory and the story of the Holocaust to be about the total loss, the 6 million who perished and the millions of others who survived, however. And so you were not to in any way single out one person. Well, that's Jim fine and dandy, isn't it? But I don't know about you, but I can't relate to 6 million. And I've been talking about this in the States at a talk I did there. And somebody that was there, I didn't even say their name, but they contacted me afterwards and sent me an article that appeared in a newspaper, and they'd cut it out years ago. They couldn't remember when, but years ago. It didn't have a date in the newspaper because they just cut out the article. And it was a story about a Jewish man who lived in New York who was struggling with the concept of what 6 million Jewish people dying in the Holocaust could be like. He couldn't conceive it. And he became obsessed with that number 6 million. He went and bought a couple of boxes of paper clips and emptied them out. Oh, okay, there's 50 in this box. Emptied them on the floor. Emptied another box, another box. He got so carried away, his wife left him. And eventually he filled a mountain in his lounge room with 6 million paper clips. And then the article said that after he hit that he stood back and he looked at it and he said, it's a pile of paper clips. Then he reached in and he just took one out and he held the one and he said, now this is a paperclip.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's so profound, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. There's an interesting parallel with that concept to the experience that the sisters had when they were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. You know, there's moments where they, people that they know and the sisters themselves are trying to help people. And that's actually mentioned in the book, something along the lines of that, that if we can save one, you know, there's not much that we can do here. There's not much that we can do against these forces. But if we can save one person, you know.
To save one is to save time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Once again, reduce it down.
Yeah, that's right. This is such an incredible undertaking that you've done with this entire, this tattooist trilogy, to tell the Mella sister stories, to tell Silke's story. You know, it all started with you meeting Lale and telling his story. Were there ever any moments of trepidation?
No, with trepidation. I'm somebody who, I think all my life I've never really known the limitation of my abilities until they absolutely get tested and I get knocked back and go, okay, so I can't do that. I can't ride a unicycle, okay? And trust me, I tried many times. I know there are many things. And so I guess it's just the nature of the beast, and that comes back from, you know, growing up in a rural New Zealand with 4 brothers and families that just there was very little encouragement. It's really quite sad if I think about it, but I don't, so let's not go there. How little encouragement there was. And so for me, nobody said I could do things, but nobody said I couldn't.
Yes, okay.
It kind of worked in my favor in the end. Oh, okay. So no trepidation. And I think being older too helps because I do stand up for myself, and I'm prepared to stand up for the people who I meet and who I connect with. As I say, for 20 years working in a hospital, I had to be the advocate. I had to stand up for the families and the patients there who in some way needed help of some sort. And so you go to bat, and that's what I guess I'm just about. You know, I'll go to bat for anybody. So
yes, yeah. Well, thank goodness that you do.
Keeps me in a great retirement. Let's face it, guys, it's the way to go.
So when that leads me into this next question, actually. When reading this book, I had to read it in little chunks.
Yep, I had to write it in little chunks.
Yeah. Is that because of the content you were dealing with? How did you protect yourself? How did you get through hearing all of this stuff and be able to ground yourself and come together and be able to write the stories?
Because I was writing Lale's story and I was with him for those 3 years while I was still working in social work at Monash in Melbourne. One of the things you know working in an environment like that is that every day you're going to meet people who are only there because something tragic or traumatic has happened to them. Now, that kind of trauma, it's actually, there's 2 different types of that trauma. There's the acute, which is what I was dealing with in the hospital every day. Acute means instant, it's just happened in the last either hour, 12 hours, day or 2. So it's still acute. And then there's what they call historical trauma, which could have happened decades ago, like with Lale and the girls. One thing I knew from my training and from these wonderful, wonderful social workers I worked with was that when dealing with somebody else's pain and trauma and guilt, to always remember it is not yours. You have no right to think you can own any part of it. Cannot help somebody who wants to talk to you if they suddenly see you becoming overwhelmed and overburdened by what you're hearing. And so, you do learn to put a bit of a front up. It works really fine for me in a hospital setting. Again, it's cute. These people are going to be in my life for a short period of time, generally only. With Lale, it didn't always work. And there were times when the technical term for it is called transference. that pain and trauma leaves the person, literally leaves them in great chunks and can transfer onto the person they're talking to.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
That did happen with Lully, and because of the longevity of my time with him. But one of my colleagues would just slap me around the head a bit and go, Heather, transference, you know what to do. Find a strategy, get over it.
What was the comparative time that you spent? So you did, 2 years with Lully, and how long did you get to spend with the
It was
Mellis?
3. It was, about a month short of 3 years. And for the first several months, I would see him 2 or 3 times a week because he insisted he had to see me because he didn't want to be here. He wanted to be with Gita. And so it was, hurry up and tell my story. I need to be with Gita. I need to be with Gita. Yeah. And so that put a lot of pressure on. And I was just listening to this man ramble, I've got to tell you. I didn't know he had a story there. He couldn't tell a story from beginning to end if he tried. There were just these vignettes being thrown at me with no sequencing or, as I say, any sort of connection whatsoever. But I just, hey, look, he seemed to be settling down, just having me sit and listen, because I never wrote anything. I never recorded anything in front of him. I just listened to him and then went home and would write up what I thought he'd said, trying to get the spelling right, writing phonetic German names.
Yes.
Not fun. But, and it was only when I finally took him home to meet my family and he had dinner with us, and I found him openly flirting with my 18-year-old daughter at the time. And I heard him giggle for the first time because one of my sons was telling him jokes about me, that he said to me when I was driving him back home after that, "You're just an ordinary person." And he now knew me because my family delighted in telling him every one of my foibles, my faults, my inability to cook a meal, how I made them do their own washing when they were 10. It's the whole lot. They dumped on him and he thought it was hysterical. And at that point, he started changing his talking with me from the clinical, the factual, to the emotional.
Yes, okay, so developing some rapport there and...
Trust, it's called trust. He had to trust me. More importantly, his dogs had to trust me, and that was the clincher, actually.
Yes, okay.
He had these 2 dogs, Tootsie and Bam Bam, and they would come to him, we'd sit there, and they were always coming up with a tennis ball, and he'd throw the tennis ball and they'd fight for it. Tootsie always got it because she was the size of a small pony. The one day she came up with a tennis ball, and when Lully went to take it out of her mouth, she growled at him. And I can still see him, he sort of gave her a clip around the ear, and I'd never heard these dogs growl before. And he sort of growled, and he said, "Give me the ball, Tootsie." And she growled again, but then she turned around and put her head on my knee. And I just reached down and took the tennis ball, and she let it go out of this big mouth. And I threw it over my shoulder, and when the 2 dogs went after it, and Lully just watched all this, and he just looked at me and went, "My doggies like you. I love you. You can tell my story."
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So, get on with the dogs, but that's the other tip for the night, folks. Macos work wonders.
So what about the Mella sisters then? How much time did you get to spend with them? And you're still in contact with them, but during the time of research and writing, how much time did you have with the sisters?
I would go there for a week at a time. And to spend intense days. Most of it would be with Libby.
Yes.
The first week that I was there, when all the family were around, of course, they were all wanting to protect these girls. They know that I've been invited there and Libby wants me there. Magda wasn't so sure about all this. But Sibby's boys, because it was their mother's story here too. And so for the first 3 or 4 days, this 3 adult generations of family just kept hanging out. They'd come to Libby's apartment or quizzing me and wanting to get to know me. And then they said to me one day, I've only had a couple of days left to go. And they said to me, "Have you been to Jerusalem?" Because we're in Tel Aviv. And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, why not?" I went, "I just haven't." They said, "We'll go there tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I can't really. Why not?" Well, you know what it's like in Australia, to be able to just go somewhere, you think, "Oh, how long is that going to take me?"
Yeah, that's right.
But my stupid answer was, "Well, it's just too far." And they kind of all looked at each other and looked at me like I was stupid. I went, "It's 40 minutes down the road." So that next day I did go to Jerusalem and spent many hours at Yad Vashem, the incredible Holocaust museum there. And the next day when I came back, they had taken that chance to all get together. And that's when they bailed me up and said, would I write the book?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So
Lots
they'd kind of gotten you out of the house for the day, and they'd had a bit of a family conference about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now they had Sibby and Nibby had made shower tapes. They are videotapes made for Steven Spielberg's Shower Foundation.
Yes, okay.
So I had those. Ziggy had made a tape also. Sibby had written up her story. I'd had it written up for her. I got that translated into English. And then it was just lots of WhatsApp video chats, which were hilarious with these 90-year-old sisters who are quite happy to look at you when you're talking, but when it's their turn to talk, still put the phone by their ear. But then I went back and spent more time with them. And then I was there actually the last time I got there was January 2020, just as the world was going to kaput. I just went back here before we all shut down. And so as soon as it opened up and Israel would let me in and Australia would let me out, I left. I went back there.
Yeah. Gosh, so what was that like then? Yeah, trying to keep up the communication over the course of the pandemic then? Just, as you said, just lots of WhatsApp chats and...
Yeah, and lots of emails. And hey, listen, I was in Victoria and we were locked in.
Yes.
I'm no longer there. And so I had plenty of time on my hands, shall we say, to be doing this.
Yeah, yeah. So I imagine there were aspects of the Mellor sisters' collective stories that you probably had to leave out, things that were omitted to serve the narrative structure. And really, after having experienced this book, I'm confident that the Mellor Girls story could have been a trilogy all unto its own,
Absolutely.
But what were the challenges of editing this body of work?
The biggest challenge was darling Livy and Sibby, who both did shower tapes, as I said, both had memories of the same event standing side by side and interpreted it differently. And not having Sibby to go back to and talk to, I was having to go back to Livy, and I'm going, Livy, on this day when you saw Balkanrath, which is one of the SS doing Gerd, and when she did, I said, you said that this is how it happened. I said, but Sibby says it was different. And every time darling Livy would say to me, she said, believe Sibby. She said, really, for a large part of those 3 years, I was a zombie.
Yeah.
And she was a 15-year-old girl. So she mentioned, so she said she just did what Sibby told her to. So I ended up going with Sibby's. And then I started looking at the differences in the words that they used in their tapes and how they describe things differently. And I came to the conclusion that one of the other sort of issues with their storyline was maturity, that difference of 4 years, and also of education. Whereas Sibby's education had stopped when she was 17. She had a decent education. Livy's had been stopped when she was only 13. So maturity and education meant that they saw the same event. But this is what happens to all of us, folks. You can all walk out the door when you leave here tonight, witness an accident, and I bet every one of you will report it differently.
Yes, yeah.
And that is when telling these stories the way I've written them, that I am so stubborn about, particularly the academics and the historians, understanding that this is memory. And when history and memory do walk together, that is wonderful, but they are going to pull apart.
Yes, okay, yeah.
When I'm telling these stories, I'm going to go with the memory of the person, always, 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 even if I cannot always back it up. I was delighted when I was talking at a synagogue in Sydney a couple of years ago and the rabbi was introducing me. And he made the comment that in Hebrew, there is no word for history. History does not exist as a word in Hebrew because their history, he said, must come from the memories of those who were there and lived and experienced what has been written about.
Yeah. So,
it's an interesting concept. Yes, you're quite right. It could have been 3 times that size. Particularly the part in the Israel part that I wanted to write so much more about, and that was Livy's relationship as the maid to the first president of Israel.
Yes, yeah.
There's so much more here that's not in there. And initially I had it in there and realised that it was taking it away from the story of the three sisters.
Yes, okay.
And it was becoming one sister story. It was like when writing about Sis Livy and Sibby and Birkenau, spending time with Magda and getting her to tell me about her time back in Slovakia for those 2.5 years. She initially was really reluctant because she was so guilt-ridden about being there. And that took a while to get out of her how that happened. But I needed to give her storyline through those 2.5 years. It had to be told too. But she gave it to me.
Yeah.
I don't bully these people, by the way, folks. Here's the thing that a psychiatrist who I spoke to when I first was talking to Lully, and I was concerned that I might have been causing damage to him, because there were so many times he was clearly upset, and I could see him when he started talking about something. He disappeared from the room that he was in with me, and he was back in that horrible place, and I could see that, and I would just watch him, and I knew that you only let him stay there for a certain period of time, and then you find a way to bring him out of it, get him back, and never ever leave him in that place. Always, I left him skipping and dancing around the lounge room with the doggies.
Okay, yeah.
So I spoke to a psychiatrist that I know well, and said about that, and he said to me, and this is true of everyone, isn't it? Nobody will tell you something they do not want you to know.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the reality. So he said, you're not harming him because he's not going to change. Did he take his grave? Of course he did. Have the sisters told me everything? No way. No way. It's not in the book there, and they've never mentioned it, but there's a fact that I know that they never mention, and I don't write, and that is when those girls, when they had to stand outside their block for selection, not for roll call in the morning, but that weekly selection to see who was too sick and who should be going straight to the gas chamber, who should go to block 25, that when that selection took place, they were naked.
Oh, wow. Right.
Yeah. There's no way that, even today, Livy and that Magda, they don't say that. They have shut that out. That the humiliation of that is just too great for them to even process and record. That was the reality.
Yeah, it's unbelievably hard to imagine, isn't it? There's so many, like it talks about it in the book, that all these different sorts of actions that are just constantly, the place is in constant chaos, and there's all sorts of things happening to create constant fear and to create subordination, and incredible.
Yeah, the total control of it. So yes, of course there's many things, and that's going to be the case in every testimony ever given by the Bible. And I've been lucky to watch many of the ones that Spielberg has. Only drop in the ocean. He's got some 55,000 of them.
Yeah.
But they will all leave things out, just like they leave out and don't talk about the storyline that I've run through with Silkers, and that is the sexual abuse, the rape. It's no other word for it, folks.
Yes.
The rape of girls and women during times of war and conflict, that which has been swept under the rug.
Yes.
Does not get spoken about in the history books. It is not touched upon, and yet everybody knows it was going on at horrendous levels.
Yes, because you had a lot of people come out of the woodworks and attest to that, didn't you, when you were writing Silker's journey?
Yeah, of course I did.
Yeah.
But we found out from the academics, or the people who'd written up the story. Excuse me a moment.
Yes, sure.
When we started digging into it, how it had not been acknowledged, and we were looking at all these shower tapes. By we, I say my publishers and I, and just looking at them and studying about here are the questions that are being asked of the women, and it was a checklist, same question, time and time again. Everyone was just being asked, and there was never any follow-up to it. And so those videographers who, I'm really glad that they did what they did, because we have these, Spielberg does. There was no follow-up to the answers, and there was never, ever anything asked about any kind of abuse on them personally.
Yes, yeah.
And so we went back to some of them and said, well, why? Why has this been ignored for 60 years, 70 years? And the answer came back, which just made me all the angrier and all the more determined to make sure that I spelt it out in Silke's story. And the response was, well, we didn't want to shame the woman, did we? And I went, you bees. I mean, it's not their shame. It should be our shame.
Yeah.
These women suffer for decades and decades. And then we found some papers, there's still a bit going on, actually, particularly in Canada, of these beautiful elderly women in their 90s now that are in care and nursing homes with degrees of dementia. They've lost their filter to no longer say the words.
Yes, yeah.
They are shocking and horrifying their family and carers, is that now is front and centre.
What were your favourite parts of the research, and what were your least favourite parts of the research into these stories?
My research for telling these stories, so just take the Holocaust, particularly say the three sisters and up to the Holocaust point. The research there is about getting the timeline of Auschwitz-Birkenau so ingrained in my head that I can never, and I've never been accused of making a mistake with something happening during the timeline. And so I know I have to honour the timeline. I don't get to play with history that way because that is there. Because even Lully and even the girls, they said, oh, such and such happened, and they think it was the middle of 1943. But when what they're describing to me has some other connection, I then know actually that happened in the summer of 1944.
Yeah, okay.
So always making sure, my research is just to get that timeline right, to verify the people who I name. And in Three Sisters, I name more of the Germans than I did in Lully or Silke's. I named the really, really bad dudes on those other two. And here's one of the things that really shocked me. And I don't know why. I keep asking me, why did it shock me? Why did it shock me, folks, when I found out how evil and horrible and cruel the women SS were? Why? I don't know. But they were. And I give you the wrap up on three in particular in the background in my notes, where you can go and look at them. These were three senior SS women who were so cruel. They were sentenced and executed for their crimes, along with the men, along with Hess and the senior men, executed. That's how cruel they were. And hearing it from Livy and reading Sibby's account, that was the thing that shocked me. How the hell do I verify that? Can't find too much about them.
God, that was the capo. What was his name? Isaac?
Oh yeah, Yitzhak.
That was a harrowing character as well, and especially to reoccur when these sisters are on the boat going to the promised land. A whole, and they talk about that journey like this is us moving towards freedom. We're finally moving towards freedom, and then there's Isaac on the same boat, and there he is, still intimidating, and pressuring these women to not say anything because he kept saying, "I deserve a second chance."
Yeah,
that absolutely floored me. Like so much of the book was.
Yeah, look, and I spoke to Livy about this, not Magda, but Livy, and you bringing him up as a good sort of character and point to sort of refer to and look at his behaviour and say, did he overstep the line? And you can answer yes in his instance. Many of the women's testimonies who I've read about Silke said that she overstepped the line by allowing herself to be raped, that she should have gone to her death, that was sort of too far, and they would never have done that. So she's been criticised for surviving because she endured being raped. Yeah. He did what he did, but there were things that he was doing that he didn't have to. And that's where you draw that line. Lully, who's been accused, well, not accused, but somebody's asked me a couple of times, oh, do you think he was a collaborator by making the numbers? No, he was surviving. And the takeout from all of my books, if nothing else, just go away and say to yourself that anyone's story you hear, which you might want to say, oh, I wouldn't have done that, I couldn't have done that. You do not get to judge.
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
these people for what they did to survive, your next door neighbor for what they may be doing, the person sitting on the bus and going home. Just don't judge people. You can't. We don't have that right. You don't know, do not know what's going on in anyone else's life. In their instances, they were making life and death decisions about survival.
There's some incredible moments in the book where you see some of the capos, and then I think perhaps there was an occasion of an SS officer trying to strike up conversation with the sisters.
She tried to befriend Sibby. And Sibby played along with it. She played along with it because, you know, she's doing it to see what advantage she can get.
Yeah, she was doing it to survive, yeah.
For her, but it's an advantage that she may be able to then extend beyond. It was always, if you can get an extra piece of bread, hey, that means that you can now share that with others.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And that was one of the things that they did really early on, wasn't it? The girl Sibby, she really quickly learned how to play that kind of game, and they started rationing, and they were using the knife, weren't they, to try and ration their own food to make sure that they, you know, weren't experiencing, it's so hard to talk about. It's incredible.
I held that little knife again a couple of weeks ago. You know, Libby brought it out for me to hold. Oh, gosh,
really?
It literally just sits in the palm of my hand.
Wow.
Yeah, that, and she said that saved our life. Yeah,
amazing that she was able to have that and conceal that, and she's kept that all this time.
Yep, doesn't leave it. When she leaves the house, she puts it in her handbag and goes.
She still takes it with her. She takes it, so it is like her talisman. Yeah.
Everywhere she goes, and at night time it comes out and it gets put on the bedside table.
Really? Wow. That was something when to go back to digress a bit to the tattooist of Auschwitz. When I read that book, when that came out, something that had never occurred to me. Of course, I'd only looked into the Holocaust when I was in high school and learning it through the curriculum, and I was fairly ignorant to a lot of things, afterwards. But the black market kind of situation that was happening within that was amazing to read about. That I hadn't even considered that kind of thing would be happening within there. And people are doing all sorts of things to try and survive and try and get things in and out, and that was amazing.
Yeah, I've met other people who said their father also was running a black market inside Birkenau. So I've met others who said they did it as well. And also I've met other folks in several countries who said to me, my parents also met in Birkenau. So when people like the Auschwitz Museum said there's no way they could have had this relationship and met and had a relationship in Birkenau, they did. You can read it in Lali's story, and I've now met many other people. Same thing. They said, loved your book because it told the story of my parents. That's where
I wonder if the knock-on effect for this, where you've said that you've had lots of individuals come to you for advice how to get my parents to open up and talk about this. I wonder if that's going to be a knock-on effect with these books, and indeed it seems like it already has been, but if that will continue to happen, that this is going to unlock something and
yeah, look, even if they just write it for the family, what I know it's happened. My only suggestion, and I know that people have taken me up on the suggestion because they write to me and tell me that it's worked, is to go and find a stranger. It's easier for people to talk to a stranger about these things. I don't know about you, but there's no way I could sit and look into my children's eyes and tell them one tiny percent of that kind of evil. How could you look in your kids' eyes and tell them these girls what it was like?
And that's why Lali needed you to be a stranger.
Yeah, and not Jewish. And not
Jewish,
I had no history. I had no baggage, no backstory.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, then he can just let it pour out.
Yeah, no judging.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Heather?
Yes, more a statement. Can you hear me, Heather?
Yes, I can.
I wanted to thank you for carrying the story out of the camps. I think a lot of stories that are told about these atrocities and these horrific tales stop, and you gave us some hope.
Yeah.
Taking the women to where they were going and finding that their lives had been able to be rebuilt was really powerful for me. Thank you.
Oh, look, you're very welcome. I never saw myself when I met Lully being somebody who could, through his story and the others, really affects so many people. And I know that sounds crazy, but in the thousands and thousands, they write to me and say that it has. And it still shocks me, and I'm touched. And actually, my publishers in London, we've created another website for me other than my author one called Stories of Hope. And we invite people to, if they help, to write down their story, anything that's been terrible, tragic for them, write it down, and they send it to my publishers in London. It doesn't get put on the website, folks. You're not to see it. We'll be doing something with them down the track. But it turns out it can be cathartic for them to send it to these strangers in London, who then my editors there get back to them. Do you want us to help you write this story better? And so this is a service that we're offering to people all around the world, and hundreds have taken us up on it. I don't know what this is costing my publishers. I don't care. They don't seem to care. They just know that every editor that works on these stories, helping these people, feel humbled and honoured to be doing this to people. The stories, most of them will go nowhere. Some of them have then taken the story with editorial help and written it as a short story and submitted it in competitions and been successful. So it's quite amazing. And one of the most humbling things I've done just in recent days, well, I think it'll be a week now, it'll be a week tomorrow, was to have been invited and to take part last Thursday in an event where I was Zooming in, well, actually, no, it was live Facebook, talking with this woman who is, she's a professor of creative writing in Lviv University in Ukraine. And she's still there. And she was doing a live Facebook event, wanting to talk with me about how can I help give hope to those people right now in the Ukraine who are still there, and how they're going to get through this. Yeah. And I can, anything I could contribute because of the books that I've written. And for this incredible hour, I chatted with Irina in Kyiv, and outside her, there's sirens going off. And yes, right now, Lviv is not being attacked like other parts of Ukraine, but this was real. This was last week. This was Ukraine. And we got to talk a little bit about the people who have fled. They are, just by fleeing, they are now survivors. Yes. What are going to be the short, the medium and the long-term effects of being a survivor, whether they return to their home country, when, and we just say when, not if, but when it is back, or they stay wherever they're fled to. And it really is humbling. And this went out in live Facebook all around the world. And I know people were watching me from as far away as South America and throughout Europe. Just one of those wonderful, wonderful, humbling experiences now comes my way.
I watched part of that the other day, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I was trawling, going through your Facebook stalking. And I did see the link, and I watched part of that, and I haven't finished the talk yet, but yeah, it was really interesting. And I am going to link that onto our Facebook page so that everybody can watch that. Yeah,
I was quite intimidated by Irina if it wasn't obvious. I mean, she was this really, really articulate and rude-eyed, intelligent woman. And it was meant to have been just a two-way conversation for her asking me a question, me asking a question. That was what was set up to go down.
Yes.
But I just wanted to hear from her. And so I pretty much gazumped her by never giving her much of a chance to ask me very much at all, but wanting to hear from her.
Part of what I did see of that talk, something that was so interesting, she was kind of talking about, it made me think about this book and looking at the parallel between when the Holocaust occurred and the bystander effect that was occurring then, because that situation was so much more controlled with what was getting out and what propaganda was happening, what people knew and what they didn't know. And I think you had talked to the point that now with the Ukraine situation, that the world knows, the world is hearing about it, the world is doing what they can. It's an amazing juxtaposition between the two.
It is. Still not
events. Yeah. I wonder, because the bystander situation that was really, really hard to read about in the book too, wasn't it? That I don't know how much information people had or what they were being told, but there was just so much discrimination and hatred and persecution and all sorts going on from people that were good people who grew up with the girls and knew the girls, and just
fear, ignorance.
Yeah.
There were some three things that came out of that chat with Irina, which once again, these are three things which will stay me forever. And she said this is what she tries to get through to the people now that it's still the new she's with, and she's trying to support. And I think these are incredible three things to live your life. Never be a victim.
Yes.
Never be a perpetrator.
Yes.
And never be a bystander.
Bystander. Yes, I remember saying that. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Have the courage to care.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. What do you... Sorry, emotional stuff. Now that the trilogy is completed and you have all of these beautiful relationships with these people that you wouldn't have met otherwise, and you know all these sorts of stories, what do you take away from this? What have you learnt from these people?
How lucky and privileged I am to have been born when I was and where I was and where I now live. And it is the luck of the draw, let's face it. But for me, it's that resilience, and that's what I spoke to with Irina about too, a little bit about the resilience we actually don't know we have until it's tested. And mine has not been tested, really. You know, I've sailed through to the ripe old age of whatever the hell I am. And you have good times, bad times. It's called living, folks.
Yes, yeah.
You actually can look at those innocent, young, uneducated to a large part people, girls and boys, and see that they were able to find a courage and a resilience that they didn't know they had, but they did find it. And it is there. And that word, we come back to it again, hope, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, when I was looking at the sort of run sheet for this evening, I saw there that you had asked that if I wanted to read something.
Oh, yes, please. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, look, it's not specifically from the book, but once again, just a couple of weeks ago, when I was in the back of the book, for those who have read it, she will have seen that there are 2 pages in the very back, and one page is written in handwriting in Slovakian, and the other page has got a translation with it. This is from a diary that Magda wrote 77 years ago in real time on a death march. This is a really significantly important document. 3 weeks ago, I held it in my hands as if it was a newborn baby. I couldn't have held it more gently and caressed it and looked at the writing of this young girl on a death march and what she was writing at the time. We put just that one extract in there, but for others there who haven't read it, and I thought, well, I have the whole document, translated. More of it will come. And I wondered if I just read the very first entry that Magda made in that diary.
Yes, please.
Because that's not in there. And then another one which part of it's in there, which relates to them on the 8th of May, what they found out. So this is what Magda wrote. She stole this journal, by the way. It's like an A4, no, smaller than A4, lined notebook that you would have had at school.
Yes, yeah.
And she stole that when she was in one of the other concentration camps, and some pens. And then she wrote this on the 30th of April, 1945. They left Auschwitz on the 18th of January. So they had been taken from January through to the end of April, from concentration camp to concentration camp, most of the time walking and most of the time through winter. And then she got to write, and she's put up at the top of it, Retso, concentration camp, 30th of the 4th. Now, Retso was one of the concentration camps that had hundreds of thousands of people in it. Yeah. It is total evacuation we are leaving Retzo and heading to another concentration camp, Halshov, which is 45 kilometers away. We are totally exhausted, mentally and physically. We can't walk anymore. I'm afraid about little Eve, as she will not make this journey. I talk about Eve. She's a young little Yugoslav girl that they had with them.
That's right, yeah.
Halshov camp is overcrowded, and another stage of starving. Not sleeping is ahead of us. Too much for our nerves. There are too many Hoftlings, which means prisoners. Slowly we are moving in small groups. Some girls' groups can walk without SS soldiers. And she's put in brackets, the smart ones have disappeared. Our group is still followed by one SS. He is constantly arguing, screaming at us, even pulling a gun on us. But we are not afraid of him anymore. We would like to run away from him. We do care anymore. We want to be free and not laying down with bullet in head. From the airport near camp, there are multiple explosions. Germans are trying to detonate all. The sky is black and smoke is everywhere. We can hear loud shelling of bombs. Can you imagine how horrific this was for young girls? Utterly exhausted to be walking and going on around them. The roads are completely congested with soldiers, civilians, prisoners, all together. Military trucks, motorbikes, tanks, cars, even horses, young people and old people, all one big mess. Everyone can run away, is running in multiple directions. Utter chaos. We are between civilians now. Our officer left us. We are so happy that he is gone. I cannot believe it. That soldier who wanted to kill us with his gun is gone now. We are finally free. So she wrote that on the 30th of April. And the next thing that I wrote, and this is part of the extract you've got in the book, was written on the 8th of May. So what's that, 8 days later. The name of this small village is Zertow. It's lovely. We now know exactly where they were because of this diary.
Yeah.
It is a very small village. There are no civilians in this village right now. We are here alone. There are Russian soldiers around, but they're quite nice to us. The Russian soldier, and then she wrote again at midnight, and she's written in the title, End of War. The Russians have told us the war is over. We cannot imagine what other people are doing outside. This is not an easy thing to say. It is the end of war. That is not only end of the war, it is the end of tears, end of death, end of gunfire sound, end of air raids, and finally capitulation of Germany. It is the end of this massive sadistic German empire, the empire which apparently should not be broken ever by anyone, the end of empire which has slaved thousands of good and honest people in many nations. That great Third Reich is now in ruins, and her powerful leaders, the bandits of Europe, now will get a punishment. So that was the 8th of May, and she's feeling safe because the war is over. They are now free. And then a little bit just written because it's not over.
Yeah, that's right.
Not safe. And on the 18th, she's written something every day, but I've just grabbed this one from the 18th of May, so 10 days later. Tonight, 2 young Russian soldiers came to our room. We told them to leave, but they would not leave. Therefore, we have decided to make a loud noise so old Captain can hear us. He finally came to our room and gave a command to his soldiers to leave us. We could not sleep the whole night. It is becoming more often that these soldiers are coming to visit us in nighttime. And what the Russian soldiers did, is well documented too. So yeah, it was like out of the fire and a frying pan and into the fire, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This amazing document now exists. It has been found after 77 years, and full contents will be revealed in due course.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that for us.
You actually asked me a question before that, didn't you? What was it?
Oh, good gosh, what did I ask you? I could have asked you. What did you learn from the sisters? Is that what I asked?
Yeah, I think I kind of covered it. Oh, I know what it was. You're asking that digging question about, so what now?
What now, Heather? What now?
Well, listen, you haven't bitten. Every time I mentioned that I wrote Lully's story as a screenplay, I kept wondering, I wonder how many times I have to say this word before she
Before I
finally
buy into that, because it's been, it's been
Yeah.
developed, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's being
Well,
developed into a TV
yes,
series.
I'm delighted to say it is a six-part mini-series, and finally, now that COVID is out of the way, and there's some freedom in filming, that it is now well on track to start.
That's amazing. So who picked that up? Who's that been?
I can only tell you at the moment the UK one, the US one. Actually, I know that the other ones in Europe too. I can't remember their name. But because it's television, going to networks, so
That's incredible.
in the UK it is Sky Atlantic, which is the rival to BBC.
Yep.
They made the incredible mini-series Chernobyl, which
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's fabulous. So how amazing is this? It started out as a screenplay, evolved into the novel, and now has come back to a screenplay.
But for the small screen.
Yes, for the small screen. And you were involved in the writing of that, of course, and
Gosh, no. I mean, they took my script and went, yeah, well, you definitely don't know what you're doing. In fact, 3 professional screenwriters have written the 6 episodes, so they've each written 2. Still amazes me that 3 people can write the same story.
Yeah.
One's on episode 1 and episode 4.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So what's your involvement?
I'm the script consultant, which means I have to approve it, and there've been many sent back with no, do not do that. You can't change that.
Yes. Yep.
I work with them, but they write it because
okay. And do you are you involved then in, like, do you approve casting and things like that, or is that not really your area?
I don't know. I don't get to approve. I just
So they're going with
those details. I get told them. I get told.
Yes. Okay.
That's fair enough too. I mean, hey, we're dealing with some very serious sort of players in the industry.
Yes. Yeah. This is an incredible journey that you've been on. This is fabulous. This is very exciting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Long way from ending. I'm on this train.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions for Heather before we wrap up? Yes, please. Yes, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Heather. Really very profound and moving and interesting in terms of how you become a writer. I just had a question around kind of what next. There's always been a lot of focus on the Holocaust, the kind of structured, the bleakness of it structured our world order and followed. So even the word genocide comes from Holocaust. But do you have any desire to reflect or write about or hear stories from those atrocities that are occurring? You mentioned Ukraine, but we have those in our region like Myanmar. There's just been there's Syria, there's Afghanistan. Because that world order was supposed to help protect people from this not to happen again, like the never again mantra.
Yeah.
So just curious about how you feel about things that are happening now, where you think you might like some stories in the future that you can help to.
Yeah. Look. Thanks for that. It's interesting if we use the phrase trilogy. Technically, they're not, because to have written a trilogy, you needed to have known you were going to write a trilogy when you wrote the first one.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I was able to have links to them, but they're tenuous, but they do stand alone, as you know, the books. I had somebody say once, look, she read them literally back to front and it didn't matter. 3, 2, 1. But absolutely, I mean, history is an incredible thing. And so for some parts of it, like the Ukraine, for example, it's still playing out. So it's not history, is it? This is current. And a lot of those other conflicts and serious, horrible things that are happening around the world are still playing out. So they don't have an ending. And part of the stories I like to tell, I kind of want to know they've got an ending for me to end them and not sort of leave them hanging. Because I know that I like to read books that wrap up, and like watching movies. Gosh, if you try to be clever and give me a movie that sort of makes me think about, well, what happened there, well, I'll be upset. I want you to tell me. So no, I do have another project I'm working on, and I'm delighted about this. It's not Holocaust, but I think in Australia here, and actually being in Perth too, by the way, it actually the book starts, and funny enough, in Perth. But it's historical fiction, and it is the story of Australian nurses during World War II. So you want to, there are parts of these stories of these girls which are known about. One in particular, very famous woman, Vivian Bullwinkle, but the collective stories of those nurses, particularly the ones who were in Japanese prisoner of war camps.
Oh wow!
Periods of time. I'm talking 3 years. Horrendous, and their survival of massacres, their survival. And what they did in those camps, because they were nurses tending to the civilians and the others there, just brilliant, brilliant stories that, gosh, if I can do just a little bit in getting their stories known by others, well, I'm going to give it my best. Because those nurses, the ones in particular I'm writing about, when they were found after 3 years and finally brought back from Singapore, they arrived in Perth. That's where they docked. And you do not know this, but some of you might. When that boat arrived, all of Australia knew that these nurses were coming back. They were thought to have been dead for 3 years. And when they finally came back after spending some time in Singapore, they took them to Singapore to be able to fatten them up, get them a little bit more healthy and fatten them up. But if their families they didn't want them to see them. Isn't it funny, the things we think of? You would think their families would have been just happy to have them in their arms. Whether they weighed 30 kilos or 50. Yes, and when that boat was arriving back into Perth, apparently one of your radio stations put out a request, if anybody's got any spare flowers in their garden, could they take it to, there was a military hospital in Perth. And apparently the line and the queue of people from Perth stretched for kilometres or miles and miles as Perth emptied their gardens of flowers.
Wow.
Brought them to returning nurses.
Yeah.
It's just
That's
a snippet.
Yeah. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being with us tonight. This has been a fabulous conversation. This has been a wonderful insight into how you work and your process in the book and the people you've met, the stories you have to tell. This has been a real privilege. Thank you so much for being our guest author for this month in our book club.
Well, Billie-Jo, my absolute pleasure and delight. And look, I'm even delighted to say, I think it's in about, 2.5 weeks' time, I'm heading your way. I'm going to be at the Margaret River Writers Festival. So,
anyone going to that? I know a few people who've got tickets. Oh my gosh, they are going to lose their mind. No, that's fabulous. Wow.
Delighted I can come in person and not be doing it.
Yes, but thank you so much for zooming in to be with us. And should we give her a round of applause? And thank you for dealing with our little technical issues at the beginning there. And
that was fine.
Yeah, we're still feeling our way through this, but thank you so much. It's
all the best to you and your book club. And gosh, but following from Hannah Kent is sort of pretty mind-blowing stuff, guys.
It's pretty good, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you for staying up, because it's 2 hours ahead over there, right? So you're.
Yeah, that's okay. I've got work to do.
Have a wonderful evening, and I'll look directly at you now. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. And to people who were viewing the live stream at home, thank you so much for tuning in and viewing with us. That was a tremendous talk. I had some wonderful things to say. So thank you for being with us, and we'll do this again next month.